name is Lindsey, for those of you who do not know me, and I'm running for the United States Congress. Before I talk about my particular race, let me sort of talk about the state of the Republican Party here in Georgia and what we're up against. We're up against a Democratic Party right now, both nationally and locally, that is committed to turning this state purple and then blue. Let me tell you something. I was in the trenches in 2002 when we were first trying to get control of this state. I worked for then gubernatorial candidate Sonny Perdue as the Fulton County chairman. In 2004, I was part of the wave that came in and took control of the General Assembly for the first time in history. I spent the last 10 years working as a leader in the Georgia House, working my way up to the majority whip for the last 3 terms to show that conservatives can govern and Republicans can govern. I'll be damned if I'm going to allow this state to go back and turn purple or blue again after the hard work that you and I put into it in order to turn this state red and to show that conservatives can govern. So I'm going to ask something real simple from you guys. Now, Eugene Hughes here, we've already heard from Jack earlier, and we've got other Senate candidates as well running. We've got gubernatorial candidates running in the Republican primary. And I'm going to ask each and every one of you that are sitting to stand up and commit that no matter who our nominee is this summer, for a governor or for any other the constitutional offices, or our U.S. Senate candidate, that we're going to be there this fall to make sure that this state stays solidly red. And I'm going to ask you all to stand up to commit to that. Will you do that for me right now? And no matter who the nominee is, they're going to be there for you, working to make sure this state stays red. I do that for 2 reasons. Number 1, I want your commitment. Number 2, I love to show that I can get a standing ovation the first 2 minutes. I've worked real hard to show that I can lead and I can govern. Let me tell you something. I'm very worried, not just about the state of the country under Obama, but I'm worried about our National Republican Party. And that's one key reason why I'm running for the United States Congress and leaving a very safe seat in the State House. Recent polls show that the majority of the American people on issue after issue after issue agree with you and I on conservative values, on conservative principles, and how the state should be run, or rather how this country should be run with conservative ideals. But only 24% of the American people have a favorable opinion of the Republican Party. Now, what does that say? That means that the American people agree with what we believe in, but they don't think we know what the hell we're doing. And we have to change that. We have to send folks to Washington that know how to get things done. I get asked from time to time, Edward, you know, there are lots of segments within your party, all over the map, all over the conservative map. Which segment do you belong to? And I'll tell you right now what segment I belong to. I belong to the governing segment of the party. I belong to the segment of the party that says that Republicans and conservatives in particular can govern and lead this country in the direction that it needs to be led. I also believe that conservatism is not a status quo sort of situation. Conservatism is not about simply saying no. Conservatism is a dynamic force that can take on the problems of our country and apply conservative principles to them and lead us in the right direction. That's why I'm running for Congress. That's why I'm working so hard. And that's why our message is working throughout this district. In Bartow County, we have leaders of the legislative body that are on board with us. In Cherokee County, same deal with a lot of legislative folks. And also, with all due respect to my friend Bob about who's the toughest sheriff in the country. You guys got a pretty damn tough sheriff here in Cherokee County. He stood up very strong for the Second Amendment. He stood up very strong against illegal immigration. And he stood up for Edward Lindsey for Congress. He's endorsed me. And a lot of other local folks have as well. Cobb County, same deal. Strong backing from folks who know me best from the legislature, as well as their mayor in Marietta, has stood up and said that he's supporting me. Fulton County, same deal when it comes to the mayor of Sandy Springs, Rusty Paul, who I ran against, incidentally, in 2000. for the Senate. Didn't quite work out that race. He beat me. And then he turned around and helped me get elected in 2004. He's backing. If you look at the numbers and the dollar numbers, we're leading in terms of cash on hand, according to the end of the year report. But I don't want to simply talk about the horse race. I want to talk about why I should earn your support. I've worked hard to show the following: that I have the strength to lead, I've got the patience to listen, I've got the wisdom to know how to negotiate without compromising my principles. And we all know that we have to negotiate at times. We have to negotiate at home, we have to negotiate at our place of work, and we have to negotiate in politics. And by the way, this is my wife over here, Elizabeth, and she can tell you right now that sometimes I lose the negotiations. And she's going to be appearing on February 20th, and thank you, Lori, for bringing that up. But in addition to that, I've shown that I've got the vision to know how to find the right path for conservative reform move forward. And finally, I've shown in my public service that I have the courage to stay the course when getting shot at from all sides. Now, Ronald Reagan, when he talked about the Russians, talked about trust but verify. Y'all remember that?
Yes.
I believe that when it comes to candidates coming to ask to earn your support, you should look at where they've been, because where they've been is a very good indication of what kind of leader they're going to be. So let me tell you a little bit about where I've been in my life. And I'll start with a little story. When I first went to apply for a job after law school, my first employer, potential employer, told me at the very end of the interview, "Edward, you've got the odor of sweat about you." Now folks, I walked out thinking, well, I surely don't have this job. About 3 hours later, he called and he informed me that that was a good thing. That meant that I had a strong work ethic, and he hired me. And I learned that work ethic long before law school, long before college, all the way back to my earliest days. I spent every summer on my granddaddy's farm. My granddaddy was a great believer that idle hands are the devil's workshop. And so he made damn sure there were no idle hands in his household. At 14, I was working packing boiled peanuts. At 15, I was selling sliding glass door locks door to door. At 16, I was working in an ice cream plant. 17 and 18, I was doing highway construction. You want to talk about why I went to college? I learned that I did not want to spend my life walking behind an asphalt truck spreading asphalt.
In the middle of summer.
I went to college on scholarships, work study, and loans, but also my dad and I set up a business for vending machines. That's how I got my way through Davidson College and Georgia Law School. And when I got out of law school, my dad said, "You know, the business is doing so well, Edward, don't you want to continue it?" I told my dad, "There's a reason why I went to law school. I don't want to work for you anymore." I went to practice law for a short while for 3 years up in Toccoa, Georgia, then came back to Atlanta, and shortly thereafter joined with 3 friends of mine and started my present law firm. My law firm basically defends folks who get sued. If you're in a business or you're an individual or you're a government employee and you get sued, y'all hire a firm like mine to represent you. Now we have grown over the last 23 years from 4 of us to 80 employees in 3 states. So I know what it's like to both start a business and to grow a business. It takes 2 things. One is a willingness to accept risk, and that's what a lot of people focus on. But the second thing is even more important. It takes the willingness to take on responsibility. I still remember when we walked out of our old firm, one of the people we were leaving behind turned to my secretary and said, "You know, loyalty only gets you so far. What are you going to do the first time Edward can't meet payroll?" Let me tell you something. That was a sobering thing when I heard that. Because that told me that not only was I risking my family and Elizabeth's family's future, but I was responsible for her and her family. And over the last 23 years, I've come to understand I'm responsible for those other 80 people's lives and for their families. And that's a heavy responsibility. And there are far too few people in politics that seem to understand what goes on when you take on that kind of responsibility. And let me also add, we've never missed a payroll. in 23 years. And when it came to tough economic times over the last few years, we have also made sure that our pay gets cut before we fire or let go anybody. We've never let go anyone because of economic reasons. We've taken the hit first. That's what being in business is all about. And that's what politics should be about too, taking on responsibility. I got elected to the State House in 2004. And like I said earlier, I've worked my way up to the leadership, to one of the top leaders in the Georgia House. I've done it by developing a reputation for being a problem solver and for being a conservative reformer. Being someone who can get the job done. And if you look at the major conservative reform pieces of legislation that we passed over the last decade, you'll see my fingerprints on an awful lot of them. When it comes to tax reform, when it comes to taking on illegal immigration, when it comes to open government, when it comes to school choice, when it comes to cutting spending, when it comes to taking on those people in our society who are the most vulnerable, often the children who are abused, you'll find my fingerprints on those pieces of legislation. I've been part of that fight, as well as Second Amendment, as well as the sanctity of life. I've taken on those responsibilities to show that conservatives can govern. Let me sort of talk to you real briefly about just a few pieces of the legislation that I've worked on. And if you go and look at our website, you'll see about 35, 36 major pieces of legislation that I've been part of, that I've helped pass. But let me sort of just mention to you 3 or 4. One dealt with property taxes. I came to the office because my folks told me that this process was out of control. And I'm here to tell you, we haven't fixed it totally yet. But thanks to my work with Chip Rogers, for instance, in which I was the House sponsor of his bill, we were able to bring at least more fairness to the reassessment process and to the appeal process. And during the darkest days of the recession, when local governments still wanted to raise your reassessments, even though your property values were going down, it was my bill that froze those reassessments and said to the local governments, you will not raise them. They can go down, but they can't go up. And we put a 3-year freeze in place to try to protect our local citizens. I worked on that. When it comes to school choice, I chaired the study committee on school choice and helped write with my good friend Jan Jones the charter school amendment and the charter bill that we now have in place. And then I went one step further. I chaired the organization that in 2012 led the fight in Georgia to pass for the first time in the United States history a pro-school choice amendment to the state constitution. We were the first state in the country to do it. And I was chairing that organization that led that fight. Parents for Better Public Schools. When it comes to cutting spending, let me tell you something. All the candidates are going to stand up here and talk about, well, we've got to cut spending, and they're absolutely right. The difference between my opponents and myself is that I've actually been the one in the room having to make those cuts. I didn't just vote for the cuts. I had to make those painful decisions. Now in Georgia, a cut means a cut. Federal government cut means they're going to reduce the future increases. But in Georgia, a cut means a cut. And over the last 5 years, we've actually had to cut our spending by over 15% over where it was in 2008. And we did so because of a balanced budget amendment, balanced budget requirement in our Constitution. So I know the importance of a balanced budget constitutional amendment because I know what it's like to govern when you've got it in place in your Constitution, and we already know what it's like up on the federal level when you don't. Like I said, I didn't just vote for those cuts. I had to make those difficult decisions. And lastly, a bill that I'm proud of, that doesn't probably go up on the radar when it comes to wedge issues, is taking on human trafficking. And I did that because I listened to my constituents who came to me and said, Edward, we have a sin in this state. We have young girls, in particular, young boys as well, who are literally living in 21st century slavery. And we need to do something about it. They hadn't been able to get a bill out of subcommittee for 3 years prior to my taking on that task. And I took on that task. I pulled together prosecutors, the Attorney General, law enforcement, social workers, church organizations. and proposals that could not even get out of a subcommittee for 3 years. We got out of the House and the Senate with only one dissenting vote. That's leadership. What do I want to do in Congress? It's real simple, but it's real hard. We all in this room know what needs to be done. But let me tell you, folks, it's going to be tough, and we're going to get shot at from all sides. We got to reduce the size of our deficit. We got to balance our budget. We got over $17 trillion in a deficit right now. Johnny Isaacson likes to tell us, if you simply just paid or spent $1 a second, it would take 32,000 years to get to $1 trillion, to give you an idea. And we've gotten to $17 trillion. So we've got to bring that under control. And we've got to make tough decisions in order to accomplish that. We've got to start actually cutting the size of the budget, not simply cutting the rate of increase. And if we do so by 1% a year over about a 6 or 7 year period, we can balance the budget. And then we can put a balanced budget amendment in place and make sure that we don't go down that dark road again. We got to take on government overregulation. Last week, I sat down with a supporter who runs a business, and I started talking to his young age. He was 22 years old, first generation from Bangladesh, United States citizen. And I was real impressed with what all he'd been able to accomplish in his life. And I asked him how his parents were doing, who brought him over here. He told me that his parents, after running a convenience store for several years, sold it and went back to Bangladesh. Why? Because there was too much regulation here in the United States, and it was easier to run a business in Bangladesh than it was in the United States. So, folks, when we got situations like that taking place, we got a problem with overregulation. Another fact, it took, and I'm a nerd, guys, I love documentaries. I tell my sons, I got 2 sons over here, Zach and Charlie, raise your hand. I forced them to watch documentaries too. Saw a documentary the other week. It took 12 years to build the Panama Canal from beginning to end. It's taken us 15 years just to get permission to start dredging the Savannah Harbor. We got a problem with overregulation. Obamacare, as bad as it is not just a problem, it's a symptom of a problem. And the symptom is we got a federal government that thinks that they can make decisions for your life better than you can. That's why we've got to repeal and replace it with market values. And that's what we got to be doing. And we got to send folks to Washington that understand that. We got to change our tax code, which is an enormous disincentive right now for business. We got trillions of dollars sitting offshore, from businesses not wanting to bring them back into the United States because of our tax code. You talk about a stimulus, bring them back in private dollars that aren't borrowed from somewhere. That's a stimulus plan. And we got to change that. We got to flatten the tax code in the short run, and we got to impose the flat tax in the long run. These are the sort of things that you and I need to work on. These are the sort of things that I have worked on in one way or the other at the state level. And I'm committed to work on at the federal level. Because we cannot simply continue with the status quo. We've got to look to the future. I've worked hard my entire political career to be that kind of problem solver, to be that kind of conservative reformer. That's where I've been, and that's where together you and I will take us. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your work here. I'm also staying in the State House for one more session, and I would love to answer any questions about what's going on down there, but I got 1 minute left, so I'm going to turn it over to questions. Sam, I also welcome you to the State House. You got huge shoes to fill in Calvin. But from everything I've heard about you, you'll be able to do it. Welcome to the State House. Thank y'all very much. Let's take a couple of questions.
We know Cherokee has some questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you support a consumption tax as opposed to income tax, as far as why on a state, a smaller state level instead of federal level, why don't we have that in Georgia?
We've been trying to get that. I agree with you. We've been trying to get that in Georgia right now. As a matter of fact, I've got my name on a bill right now to try to move us toward that. It's very dangerous where we are right now. We have the highest state income tax of any of our surrounding states. It's a very dangerous position to be in. And like I said, I've been trying to get that as well. Fortunately, I can't get everything done, but my name's been on that bill as well. I agree with you. Who's next? Yeah. Let me answer your question directly. You want to ask me the same question? Please do, because I'll answer your question directly.
No, I have a different question.
Okay.
Since you're running for Congress, are you in favor of keeping John Boehner as Speaker? And also, would you back up Ted Cruz when he is saying, and I really got tired of hearing people say that we couldn't win the showdown, but all we had to do was keep saying no until they caved. So my question is, would you back something like that, and would you be willing to vote against Speaker Boehner and take that risk?
Here's what I'm going to do with anybody with Speaker. I'm not going to get into personality, but here's what I'm going to demand. I'm going to demand that we have not just the Speaker, but the Majority Leader, the Majority Whip, the caucus chair, and everyone else commit to this simple rule that unfortunately this leadership has violated, which is we don't bring a bill to the floor unless a majority of the Republican caucus believes it's a good idea. That's what I'm going to commit to. I'm not going to get involved in personalities on who, because I don't know who's going to be running against them, but I commit to you this. I'm not voting for anybody unless they commit to following that simple caucus rule. Now your second question regarding Ted Cruz, I agree with you. Sometimes you got to draw a line in the sand and you got to fight, and we got to do that. And I also want to answer your other question regarding immigration because it was a good one. Far too long on immigration, we have looked at what the folks who want to come in want. Folks, immigration policy ought to be based on one simple principle. What is in the best interest of the American people who are already here? That's what we should be basing our immigration policy on. We shouldn't be basing it on who wants to come, but what is in our best interest. And I think once we turn to that, your sort of concerns will be taken care of. That's what I've been concerned about. Yeah.
Currently, our energy policy in the United States has driven the price of gasoline up 36%
Yeah.
since Obama came in office. What are your views on what we can do differently? Because for every time the gasoline goes,
Yeah.
everything at the grocery
Yeah.
store, everything you buy.
I'm glad you brought that up because when you raised 1 minute, I had to cut the energy part of my talk. So thank you very much. That's another priority that we need to be having in terms of a workable energy policy. We've got to throw everything we have in terms of increasing our supply, and that means increasing our oil supply, running the pipeline down from Canada. That means increasing and unleashing our oil companies in terms of being able to drill more in the United States and domestically offshore. That means also doing the same thing with natural gas. That means also doing the same thing with nuclear energy. We got to remove a lot of the regulations that really are only there to try to slow things down. And we need to unleash that. That's the only way we're going to reduce prices in the United States is by unleashing the domestic supply that we already have here in the United States. Now, thank you for raising that. I didn't get you.
Last question.
Yes, sir. In the back.
Representative Lindsey, I want to thank you for coming today,
Yeah.
and thank you both in the legislature and the governor for doing what they've done to help with education funding this year in particular. What other hot button education issues are before the legislature this year, the Georgia legislature,
Yeah.
and where do you think they're going?
Funding is always a big issue, and that's one big issue. I've got two very important school choice bills out there. One is what's called the parent trigger, which will basically empower parents in existing traditional public schools to petition their local school boards to convert their traditional public school into a charter school. I think that'll help increase the dialogue between parents and the local school board and help involve parents more in their children's schools, which is a key component to any reform. That's one issue. The second one I have is another charter bill that will make it legal for charter schools to basically partner with either local businesses or local cities to basically help create charter schools and provide the necessary funding for them. I think that those two things will be vitally important in terms of school choice. There's a lot of other measures as well. I'd love to chat with you some more, but those are two things in particular that I'm working on. And one of the reasons why I decided to stay in the Georgia House.
What about Common Core?
Common Core, is basically I understand the concept behind it, but whoever talked about it, but Jack, was it you? Where are you, Jack? Jack, he's in the other room. Jack's absolutely right. It was designed wrong. It was designed top to bottom. That's not how any kind of standard should ever be developed. It should be bottom up. We need to put it aside and start over again. And so I agree with what Jack was saying. We need to have a bottom up. We need to create tough standards for our students. We need to create tracks for them to go to, regardless of whether or not they want to go to college or simply get a technical skill.
When you say we, do you mean federal or state?
I mean school board. Okay, that's where standards should start. It should start with the school board, local school board, then the state school board. It should stay at the state level, but it should start at the local level. And when I say we, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about parents, teachers, local school board. That's where it should start. And I do encourage strong standards, but it's got to be bottom up, and that's what my problem is with Congress. All right, I know I'm out of time, but I tell you what I'm going to do, because I love questions, and I love listening to people. Like I said, remember, I get all my best ideas from meetings like this. All the bills I talk about that I helped pass, I didn't start with them. Somebody came to me. So I'm going to stick around afterwards. And I want you guys to stick around with me. Anybody who wants to simply talk to me about what they're concerned about, and I'll be here to listen. Thank y'all very much for having me.